I'm Ethan McReynolds from Fox 13 Seattle. I'm joined by Pierre Noujaim of Fox 9 Minneapolis to break down the wild winner-take-all Game 3 between the Sounders and Minnesota United. Pierre, I'm still in shock. So many shifts in momentum from start to finish. Let's begin with that hot start from Seattle. What did you see from Minnesota's perspective in those first 10 minutes with the Sounders getting 2 goals on you guys right off the bat?
Well, the Loons really, Ethan, were completely shell-shocked, going behind 2-0 in the first 8 minutes of the match. That first goal really was a defensive breakdown, and then that second goal, a mistake by Morris Duggan on the back end on a clearing attempt, just whiffed on it, really, and the ball ends up in the back of the net for Seattle, and everybody's looking around like, I cannot believe this is happening again, the same way that we saw in Game 2. So Minnesota really shell-shocked in that first 10 minutes, something we were not expecting in Game 3.
Yeah, from the Sounders' perspective, I mean, Pierre, you mentioned it, much of the same from Game 2. And the game, the offensive power in Game 2 came from some tactical changes from Brian Schmetzer with Danny Musovski starting up top with Jordan Morris. And you see that first goal, a lot of one-touch passing, some beautiful build-up, and then Albert Rusnak with an incredible volley beating St. Clair to his left. And yeah, the second goal, fortunate for the Sounders to get it, but as they say in Seattle, when it rains, it pours, and that sort of takes us to the rest of the match. Pierre, in the 41st minute, Minnesota gets that goal back on the free kick by Pereira. But then in the 41st minute, Joseph Rosales with the straight red card right before halftime. What did you guys see there? What was the mood like in the building?
Really, the mood was, everybody was looking around at each other thinking, Joseph Rosales, what in the world are you thinking? You absolutely lost composure in a dire moment here for Minnesota that sent them down to 10 men. And oddly enough, it had been the first time all season that Minnesota had lost a player due to a red card, and it could not have come at a worse time. And I have to be completely honest with you, Ethan, we were all at halftime ready to write Minnesota's obituary. You're down 2-1 going into the second half, and you are now down a man against a team like Seattle. Things were not looking good whatsoever for Minnesota United FC. But then the second half happened, and it was something that was kind of out of a Hollywood movie script. I don't think anybody could have predicted it. But yeah, in that moment, everybody was looking at Joseph Rosales thinking to themselves, what in the world were you thinking? Absolutely lost his head. An inexcusable mistake on his part. But fortunately for his team, it didn't cost them the match. So Joseph Rosales gets to kind of shake his head and smile about it now. But in the moment, it looked like it was going to be complete disaster for Minnesota.
Yeah, it's interesting. From the Sounders' perspective, throughout this entire season, we've had a lot of miscues and a lot of players that have lost composure and gotten red cards. Nuhu with a couple throughout the season. So to see it work in the Sounders' benefit, definitely not something that we're used to here in Seattle covering this Sounders team. The Sounders had every opportunity to bury Minnesota. You go forward in the beginning of that second half. Seattle was on the front foot. Beautiful build-up play in about the 50 or 55th minute. Albert Rusnak he was fed right at the penalty spot on a nice cutback from Christian Roldan. He hits the post, and that's a huge theme throughout this Game 3. But you look at that chance right there, and the Sounders had a lot of other grade A chances, but that chance from Albert Rusnak right there that would have made it 3-1, and I feel like would have signed, sealed, and delivered Minnesota's obituary. It ends up hitting the post, something that the Sounders would see later in the match. But Pierre, Minnesota, 2 goals in 10 minutes to take the lead right after that, with the Sounders unable to seal this one. I'm sure Alliance Stadium was absolutely rocking after those 2 goals.
Complete pandemonium, if we're being completely honest. And I couldn't agree with you more, Ethan. At that point, back in the 55th minute, like you said, when that ball was on its way to goal, I thought for sure that ball was going to end up in the back of the net, and it somehow hits the post. And when you think about it, it would have made it a 3-1 game, and I think all the life would have gone completely out of the building. And I think that would have been a wrap for Minnesota, if we're being completely honest. But it's so crazy how this match just completely flipped from that moment on as Minnesota scores 2 goals. The go-ahead goal coming on a corner, Anthony Markanek left all alone on the back post. A defensive mistake there for Seattle. unmarking a man on the back post and left him all the way wide open to put it in the back of the net to take a 3-2 lead. And it was just complete and utter pandemonium here at Allianz Field as everybody is looking around in a complete state of disbelief. How in the world does Minnesota find a way to not only tie the match, but come back and take the lead while being a man down? It's something we had never seen before. And in fact, it is the first time in playoff history that a team has scored a tying goal and scored a go-ahead goal after receiving a red card, something we had never seen before in MLS playoff history.
Yeah, and I've got to say, very, very uncharacteristic for the Sounders under Brian Schmetzer to let something like that happen. That's just not something that I saw in the card, specifically when the red card was given. It's like, you think of this Sounders team, they have the championship pedigree, they have the veteran leadership, and they have arguably the best coach in Seattle sports history, one of the best coaches in MLS history, in Brian Schmetzer leading the way. And somehow just an absolute collapse from the Sounders after going up a man at the end of the first half. Set piece defending, I know, was an emphasis throughout the entire week in training, throughout the last couple of weeks, throughout this entire series, with how good Minnesota is on set pieces. To be up 2-1, up a man, and allow 2 set piece goals, with the go-ahead goal, Pierre, that you mentioned being an unmarked man at the back post. I mean, that is as uncharacteristic as it gets for Brian Schmetzer's side. But the game was far from over at that point in the 88th minute with the Sounders pressing. Jordan Morris finds the equalizer, the hometown guy. I'm sure. I'm very curious to know what the feeling was like inside the stadium when Jordan Morris equalizes. Minnesota not being out of it, but knowing this one was far from over.
Yeah, everybody was honestly probably thinking that, of course, this would happen. Of course, Seattle would do this. Again, I think people still are a little bit gun-shy after what Seattle did to Minnesota in the Western Conference Finals a number of years ago, and they knew it was not going to be easy. They knew the Sounders would not go quietly into the night, and of course, Seattle still had that man advantage. Minnesota switched to that 5-3-1 formation to really try to bottle down and hold Seattle off, but again, like you just said, Ethan, a set-piece opportunity now for Seattle off the corner, and they get the equalizer. It almost felt inevitable, especially with the way things were going from the 80th minute on. Seattle was really pressing up high and giving Minnesota fits, and they were able to get out of it until that moment. So yeah, it was an equalizer that really depressed the fans in the time being, but I think you also, if you had some of the fans here, I would ask them, I'm sure they would probably tell you, hey, listen, even though they tied it late in the match to make it 3-3, given how things were, especially after Joseph Rosales went out with a red card, we would take a 3-3 draw, absolutely no problem, head into PKs and take our chances that way, and that's certainly what happened. So even though they were down, they certainly were not feeling like the game was over by any means. I would have to imagine they were just grateful that they were in a position to still try to win the game.
Yeah, and for the Sounders, there was sort of a I would say I was quite frustrated that the Sounders were able to find the equalizer, but they shouldn't have been in that situation in the first place. So a bit frustrating. Relief to be on the doorstep of the season ending and to have Jordan Morris give some hope on the road. But you just look back at that red card and you're up a man and you give up 2 goals. Just very, I go back, very uncharacteristic from Brian Schmetzer's side. But we go into the penalty shootout. Andrew Thomas subs in for Stefan Frei. Brian Schmetzer received some questions from the media after Game 1 in deciding to leave Stefan Frei in. Sounders ended up losing the Game 1 penalty shootout. Andrew Thomas did everything in his power to win this match for the Sounders. Very, very, very unfortunate for it to come down on his shoulders. He provided 2 opportunities for the Sounders to go out and walk it off, with Obed Vargas hitting the post. There's that post again, and then Osaze de Rosario having his penalty saved. Probably not his best effort, he would tell you. Absolute heartbreak, and then for Andrew Thomas to step up to the PK spot for the first time since U.S. Open Cup last season when he walked it off against Louisville, and to see him hit the crossbar after gutting through an arm injury to put the Sounders in a position where they were going to win that game. Absolutely gut-wrenching. Pierre, I'll send it over to you for all the jubilation in Minnesota that you guys experienced.
Really, Ethan, I mean, how many twists and turns really could you possibly have in a match? I mean, this match had just had everything you could ask for. And it's funny because when the playoffs began, we spoke with the players here in Minnesota. We asked them their feelings on a best-of-3 format, and each player told us they don't like it. They would prefer to be one and done, or if it's 2 matches with aggregate, they don't like the best-of-3 format. They were as honest as they could be. But if you're sitting at the league office right now, you're probably thinking to yourself, here's the blueprint for what drama really looks like. How could it get any better than what we saw in this series between Minnesota and Seattle, with what we saw in Game 1, with how Seattle came out firing in Game 2, and then the dramatics from what we saw here tonight in Game 3. And I have to be honest with you, Ethan, I thought Seattle was the better team in Game 1. They were certainly the better team in Game 2. But it comes down to, like we've just been talking about over the last few minutes, an absolute missed opportunity here for Seattle, being up a man and allowing Minnesota to score not once but twice with 10 men. I've never seen anything like it, not just in a regular match, but certainly in a playoff match. And I thought Minnesota was going to go down and get eliminated twice late in that PK shootout. Anthony Markanich, he misses. Hassani Dotson, he misses. But like you said, that right post saved Minnesota a couple of times tonight. I asked Dane St. Clair after the match, I asked him if there's a little bit of voodoo magic in that right post. And he said, hey, wherever they've set up the goal, leave it exactly where it is. I can't argue with it. Whether it's a miss or a save, it goes down as the same. And Minnesota is marching on remarkably to the Western Conference semifinals.
Yeah, lots of pain in that Sounders locker room, as you can imagine. Albert Rusnak saying, making the point the Sounders never lost in regulation this series against Minnesota, yet they are heading home eliminated from the MLS playoffs. A crazy first-round playoff matchup between Minnesota United and Seattle Sounders FC. Pierre Noujaim out in Minneapolis at St. Paul at Alliance Stadium to break it all down for us. Pierre, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ethan. Appreciate it.